Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Coralie Whitby, and I am the Education Coordinator for the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center. This morning, we are really pleased to bring you the webinar entitled Donor Gametes, Educated Choices. And joining us today is our presenter, Ms. Wendy Kramer. She is the co-founder and the Executive Director of the Donor Sibling Registry. The DSR is a charity organization founded in 2000 by Wendy Kramer and her donor-conceived son Ryan to assist individuals conceived as a result of sperm, egg, or embryo donation that are seeking to make mutually desired contact with others with whom they share genetic ties. Wendy has co-authored several published papers, and you will all be receiving a list of those papers in the documentation that we send out following the webinar. She has reviewed abstracts for the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, and she has also been a peer reviewer for the journals Human Reproduction and RBM Online. Wendy and her son Ryan have appeared on 60 Minutes, The Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, and many other news shows and publications. And now for a bit of housekeeping. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation using the questions you submit through the Q&A feature. You may submit your questions at any time during the session, and I really want to emphasize that. Don't try to remember it, because when it comes to the end, you may have forgotten what that question was, so feel free to ask that question or submit it at any time. To ask a question, you simply click on the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand portion of the screen, type in your question, and click the send button. If you happen to be in the full screen view, you can click on the question mark icon in the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. This will open the Q&A panel on your screen only. When you submit your question, it will be visible to all of the panelists, but not to other attendees. We expect this presentation to last approximately 45 minutes with 15 minutes for Q&A. We will be distributing, as I mentioned, a copy of today's presentation and a comprehensive list of all answers to all the questions submitted during the webinar, as well as some presenter handouts. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, please contact WebEx Technical Support. The number is on the screen. I would suggest that you write that number down in case something happens during the presentation. As a reminder, this presentation is, in fact, being recorded today. All right, so here we are, and here is Wendy.
Hi, thanks so much, Coralie. Thanks for having me today. So we're here to talk mostly about donor children, and that's egg donor, sperm donor, and embryo donor children. So all of these three scenarios here can bring up questions that might be hard to answer. A visit to the doctor might bring up a question like, is there any skin cancer in the family, which you may not be able to answer as far as one side of a child's family. A family friend may come visit that is unaware of the donor conception and say, oh, wow, where did he get that blonde hair? Which might cause some discomfort. And a school party, and that's in there because of one specific time when my son Ryan was in first grade, and I went to pick him up at a school party, and there were moms standing around with their glasses of wine kind of chuckling, and they called me over and said, your son's been telling tall tales. And because it wasn't in character for Ryan, I was like, really? What did he say? And they were smiling, and they said, well, he just told us that his mom has never met his dad. And I said to them, well, actually, that's true. And I didn't let them suffer for too long, a few seconds before I explained, that Ryan was a donor baby. So it can happen where you least expect it for donor families. All right, next slide. So donor children, egg and sperm donor children, are unaware of half of their medical history. With embryo children, there's both sides that are a mystery. So there are a lot of questions that children might have about that one half that they just don't have, and it will become apparent when they visit the doctor. Next slide. There's very little sharing and updating of urgent and not so urgent medical information by the clinics and the sperm banks. So it can become, very painful for children who don't have access to this information. Next slide. The donor information on the donor profiles that most families get nowadays is a snapshot of one day in the life of a donor, and it's usually a healthy, young donor. We don't know what happens the next day, the next week, or the next year with the donor or his immediate family. Next slide. So we surveyed both egg donors and sperm donors, and we found out that 84% of sperm donors and 97% of egg donors had never been contacted by their clinics for medical updates. This is disturbing because 23% of the sperm donors and 31% of the egg donors said that they did indeed feel that they or close family members had medical issues that would be important to share with families. And it's important to note, too, that 94% of our sperm donors said that they would have accepted an offer for genetic testing had it been offered by the sperm banks. Next slide. So what's missing? I mean, as far as the medical, we know, the medical community knows the importance of knowing your family's health history. The U.S. Surgeon General has a family health history initiative that talks about the importance of knowing your family health history. So this can be important for preventative reasons, for screening, for possible drug reactions. For donor children, they want to know, what do I have a predisposition for? And for doctors, they want to be able to more accurately predict disorders, and knowing about a person's medical background can be very, very helpful in knowing how to move forward with preventative care and care relating to a current situation. Next slide. So we hear many, many stories on the Donor Sibling Registry about families with children with medical issues. Now, is it more medical issues than the general public? Probably not. But the difference here is that when you have, in a traditional family, if a parent passes along a genetic illness, it might be, to his half of his 2 children or 4 children or 5 children. When you have donors that are creating 50 children, 100 children, 150 children, passing along a medical issue becomes, it can become an epidemic. So it becomes much more serious. We have many stories on the Donor Sibling Registry where families, only because of the DSR and the ability to share and update medical information with each other, they're actually saving lives. Rebecca Blackwell's story, which has been in the press, her son had a fatal heart condition. He had to have surgery for it, and she also got to alert other families on the Donor Sibling Registry about this, and therefore the other families were able to get their children in for adequate testing. But we have reports of, everything from autism, cystic fibrosis, cancer, a lot of urgent medical issues that need to be shared amongst families and donors. Next slide, please. So we surveyed 1,700 sperm donor recipients. We're in the process of writing up the paper now. We presented it at ESHRA this summer, and hopefully we'll have it published within the next year. But what we found from the 1,700 sperm donor recipients, and about half of these women did come from outside of the DSR, so we feel like it's representative of families, within, but also outside of the DSR. 93% of them would not use a sperm donor of someone who had produced an offspring with autism. And this is really interesting to look at because when people choose their donors, they have no idea how many children are already born from that donor and how many may have already reported autism. 67% of the recipients believed that sperm banks should be legally required to comprehensively test donors. Currently, there is no comprehensive medical testing. Some clinics and facilities test some donors for some diseases. 78% of the recipients wished all donors were psychologically tested, and 61% who used anonymous donors wished they had used an open donor. And there are many people like myself who were never given a choice, and most of us were never adequately counseled and educated on what does it mean to a child, what is the difference between choosing an anonymous donor versus an open donor. So I think there's a huge gap here where clinics and sperm banks need to step in here and properly educate parents on what it means, the difference between open and anonymous donors, and what it means to the child. Next slide. So sometimes these issues can come up for offspring when they do school projects. There can be many holes in their ancestry, cultural backgrounds, medical backgrounds, and this can show up when they make family trees. I know for my son, when he was in elementary school, he had to make a family tree, and we made a full, complete family tree of my side of the family, which was full and complete for him until he got to school and other kids compared it to theirs and said, where's the other half of your family tree? So, at that point he had to explain that he only knew about one half of his family tree. All right, next slide. So here's also the Fiscal Party, and that's that kind of came out of the story that I've already told about Ryan at the first grade school party. So, just more reason for us as parents and you guys as clinics to sort of promote openness and honesty and a full sharing of information and kind of move away from this whole aura of secrecy and shame, and we should be helping parents to kind of come from this place of openness and honesty so that then their children can go through these school events and parties and deal with strangers in a more comfortable way. All right, next slide. So some donor-conceived children are upset. Curiosity is natural. It's an innate desire to know where they come from, and for many years, donor offspring, most of them didn't know they were donor offspring because of the secrecy. But now as they're getting older, we're beginning to hear from them. And the curiosity is not that they're looking for new parents, they're just looking to fill out the missing pieces of their identity. So for many, knowing where you come from helps define who you're becoming, especially for young adults. Next slide. So for those families who think they're keeping the secret too, most donor-conceived people who find out later in life tell us that they had an idea something wasn't right. So there are unspoken cues that are picked up by children. A family friend says to a child, "Oh, wow, Sue, you have your father's eyes." And the father or the mother looks at the father and the father looks down. And the kid picks up that something's just not right there. So even for families who think they're keeping the secret, kids are a lot more intuitive than we give them credit for. All right, next slide. So I think the families, egg donor families, sperm donor families, embryo donor families, we can learn a lot from adoption, from what adopted people have been telling us for many decades. And we know that not all adopted people are curious, just as not all donor-conceived people are curious. Some say, this is my family, I'm fine. I really don't need to know my genetic roots. But then you get the other end of the scale for people who, like this girl, saying, I feel that half of my identity has been stolen. So, I think as parents and as clinics advising parents, we have to prepare for the most curious children and make sure that we're ready to answer their questions and that we can adequately answer their questions. All right, next slide. So potential clinic liabilities. So in the future, there could be liabilities, things that we haven't seen yet. Donor offspring coming and saying, if you knew these things about my medical history, why didn't you tell me? Or, you know, how come I never received updated medical information? The donor-conceived people that I know on the DSR, you know, they're not there looking for money, certainly from their genetic relatives or their biological parents. But who knows? You know, in the future, you know, we have no idea what kind of liabilities there can be. All right, next slide. We know past litigation has been mostly with known donors. The anonymous donors through sperm banks and clinics, we really haven't had a lot of litigation. We have, for example, California Cryobank changed a medical information on a donor profile. That was a big court case that we all know about. And more recently, there was a child born with cystic fibrosis from New England Cryogenic, and those parents are suing that bank because New England Cryogenic claimed that they did test for cystic fibrosis, or certain tests for cystic fibrosis. So, you know, certainly in the medical and genetic information, I think there's room for some legal issues in the future. All right, next slide. So for egg donor children, they're all pretty young still, but they're going to follow in the heels of sperm donor children. You know, will these kids be looking for medical information? Absolutely. Will they be looking to make mutual consent contact with their genetic relatives? Absolutely. If they find out that there was medical information that a donor reported but that their parents were not told about, will they be upset? Absolutely. I mean, this sharing of information goes both ways. You know, if a donor donates eggs or sperm and the resulting child has a genetic illness, they have, you know, they want to know about that too, as they're probably having their own children. And you know, in the future too, we really need to look at the rights. Do these people have the right to make mutual consent contact with each other? Or do the clinics and sperm banks have the right to prohibit and try their hardest so that these people don't find each other? So, you know, and that's especially with the donors. And I think what it calls for is better education and counseling at the front door of both the parents and the donors. All right, next slide. So as I was saying, in recent years, we're finally hearing from the donor offspring. You know, what is being a donor-conceived child? What does it mean? What are you missing? You know, why are you curious? Why are you searching? So we did the research. We had 751 respondents, which is the largest study to date on offspring. And we asked them, you know, why are you coming to the Donor Sibling Registry? Why are you looking to connect? And that was with half-siblings and with their donors. So we can see a large percent of them just want to know what the donor looks like. A large percent of them also want to connect with their half-siblings. They want to know more about their ancestry, to know more about themselves. They want to know more about their medical history. Many want to establish a relationship with the donor and half-siblings. And many of them just want to know more to answer that question, who am I? And answering the question, who am I, a lot of times is looking at where did I come from? Okay, next slide. So donors, you know, we have donors, specifically sperm donors, but now that there's egg banking as well, you know, that's sort of an unknown future. But we have donors coming to the DSR saying, wait a minute, I just looked at your website and I have 60 children. How can that be? I was promised no more than 10 kids or 20 families or, you know, whatever the promise was. Now, has there been any litigation so far about donors, you know, being upset that they have 50 kids? Not yet. Could it happen? Absolutely. For parents, we've already seen lawsuits about medical issues. What we haven't seen are offspring coming forward saying, I have the right to know. I have the right to know my genetic family and my medical background. You know, also the other thing here is that donors sometimes are still promised anonymity by the sperm banks and egg clinics. And in this age of DNA testing and the internet, many, many families, more than I think anyone would imagine, actually know who their donors are. So that's something to be very careful about, promising anonymity. And I speak from personal experience because my own son figured out who his donor was through DNA testing. All right, next slide. So as I said before, the information sharing is a two-way street here. So donors, as well as the parents, need to be adequately educated about sharing and updating medical information, and also realizing how important it is for them to get updated information for families who have had children from their donations. And donors need to be properly educated on their rights to reach out and have open lines of communication with the families they've helped and the children they've helped to create. All right, next slide. So I think, you know, for the future, we need to kind of put a question at the very, very top, and that's, is it fair to bring a child into the world with no way of knowing about their ancestry, medical background, genetic background? And from that, then we kind of look at what's needed here. So we know donors need to make better educated choices for themselves and to be really aware of what donor-conceived people are saying and feeling, understand the difference between anonymous versus open donation. Many donors are choosing to be anonymous because they're not really clear what being an open donor would be and what kids might want from them. And so we need to properly educate them. The children need educated choices. Obviously, children aren't making very many of these choices, but the parents need to make educated choices on their behalf. And again, that's looking at open versus anonymous donation, having the right to know how many kids are already out there born from your donor, and having, you know, updated medical information. So yeah, these parents are making choices not only for themselves, but for their children's futures, medical futures, you know, even when they're adults. And the clinics need to be offering this education and this counseling to their patients. And I think clinics need to be better educated, or educate themselves on reading up on what do donor offspring have to say, and what are the medical issues, and what are the ramifications of having 100 children for a donor. You know, the more that the clinics educate themselves, I think the better information they can then give their patients. All right, next slide. So we can help. We can help be a middle organization between clinics and sperm banks and offspring, which we're sort of already doing, but you know, it's just recently, very exciting, that some egg donor clinics are actually writing the DSR into their contracts and agreements. So they're kind of setting up this pathway of communication between recipient families and donors right from the get-go. Sperm banks have not done this yet. We're hoping someday they will. But it's basically handing the power over to the families. Next slide. And by doing this, we can help clinics and sperm banks with their workloads and also with their liabilities. The clinics and sperm banks won't have to be the middleman as far as contact. The DSR has a proven record of success. We have successfully connected almost 10,000 people, or actually more than 10,000 people, on the DSR with each other. And it's all mutual consent contact between the donors and the recipients. Next slide. So we want to ultimately provide more support for donor-conceived people. And it's one of those things, you know, as Oprah says, when we know better, we do better. And we've had the opportunity to know better over the last 12 years or so, certainly since the DSR has been in existence, as we're able to communicate with each other, share our stories, you know, with the world through the media and the internet. You know, we've all learned that open communication is the best way that we can serve the needs of our kids. Next slide. So the DSR can provide families and donors with a very non-threatening way to connect with and share information with each other. Everybody can connect and share emails and photos and medical information, and even we have a 25-question questionnaire for donors to fill out with the 25 questions that we heard most asked by donor offspring. Things like, what's your favorite joke? Where did your ancestors come from? Things like that. What's your occupation? So non-identifying information, but information nonetheless that can be very important for a child to know. For example, in addition to sharing the medical information, if you have a son who was created from an egg donor, and your son at 8 years old started playing the violin and loves it, and he may say to you one day, I wonder, you guys aren't interested in music, and I am. I wonder if my egg donor played violin or another musical instrument. You'd have the resources then to go to the DSR, send the egg donor a note anonymously, if you'd like, and if she wants, and say, hey, my son just started playing violin, and he was wondering, do you play violin or a musical instrument? And the donor could very easily answer and say, oh, actually, yes, I played violin for 5 years when I was a teenager. Great. So it just opens up that pathway of communication that's non-threatening to anybody, but it helps kids get the answers, and sometimes they're very simple answers. Did my donor play violin? My son asked, I wonder if my donor likes to, ride mountain bikes. It's usually things like that that can be very easily and quickly answered. Next slide. So our job at the DSR is not only to educate and counsel people on the DSR, the donors, the parents, and the offspring, but it's to reach out to the clinics, the sperm banks, the agencies, so that you, in turn, can also better educate your clients and your patients. Ultimately, we're trying to move forward to make happier and healthier families, and I think if we all work together to do this, we could get there a lot quicker than we have been. All right, next slide. So currently we're approaching 40,000 members, which is really exciting, and we have, like I say, about 10,000 matches. These are 9,400 as official matches, but many people join the DSR and don't actually add a posting. They just connect with their match without adding a posting. So we actually have probably about another 30% of matches than what we show. We have amazing stories. It doesn't mean that these stories of connecting with previously unknown genetic relatives don't create bumps in the road sometimes, just as an adoption. Yeah, there's certain challenges with connecting with another family, another 5 families, another 70 families who you share genetic connections with. But the DSR provides support. We have licensed counselors on the site, and we're there to help everybody. And we've helped so many people move through some very tricky situations. Next slide. So how the DSR can help clinics and sperm banks specifically is that they no longer have to be in the middle. I mean, for so long, the main focus of fertility centers, sperm banks, clinics was to achieve pregnancy, with not a lot of thought of what happened after pregnancy. It's only a baby for a short time, then it's a child and an adult. So if the agencies can go back and focus more on getting pregnant, we can handle the issue of contact between parties who wish contact with each other. It's all mutual consent. People can share and update important medical information. And again, it kind of empowers the families and the donors that they can choose to exchange information when they want. They don't have to ever worry, oh, I wonder if my egg donor got breast cancer or anything like that. They have open lines of communication with each other, and again, it's very empowering both for the donors and for the families. And we've had some terrific feedback from these families who are now writing the DSR into their contracts, because it takes away so much of the worry of the families, takes away the liability of the clinics, and it also lets the donor have some comfort. You know, she's not going to be tracked down someday. She has open, anonymous communication with the families, and we've seen that can be a great thing for donors as well. So next slide. So how the donor sibling registry works, just quickly here, is that donor children, if they're under 18, they come with their parents. Over 18, they can register on their own. And donors all register on the DSR and post their information. Before you register, anyone's welcome to read everything on the site. You can search and see if anyone's already posted for your donor number. If you decide to join, it's $75 a year or $175 for permanent membership. And then this allows you to contact people, add postings, you know, make yourself available to be found by others. And then when you establish a connection, you choose what level of contact you want. You can share photos, you can share emails, you can right away give each other your phone numbers, which is what many people do. But basically, this allows you to take it at your own speed, your own comfort level, be able to listen to the people that you connect with, their comfort level. Sometimes some people jump into this. Some people need to move very slowly and carefully. Everybody comes at this with their own speed and comfort level. There's a medical page that is only shared for people who sign up with the same clinic or sperm bank and donor number. So, and any time that information is added or edited on this medical page, you get automatic alerts. Just like when anyone signs up for your particular donor number, you also get an automatic email. So we keep people in the loop when they have new matches, new family members, when new medical information is posted. We try very, very hard to make sure that everybody always has important information. New family members, medical information, those are the two most important. All right, next slide. So again, we're empowering the families. You know, the half-sibling relationships can be very important for offspring. And it's, you know, for donor children, it's the nature and the nurture. So the donor child is in great part a result of parenting and community and family and culture, but also there's a blueprint there. You know, half of a lot of their characteristics and their talents and their physical attributes comes from the donor. So they're going to want to connect with that other side too. Some parents seem to think, if I love my child enough, they won't be curious. And as we've learned in adoption, it has nothing to do with loving your parents. You may adore your parents and still want to know where you come from. All right, next one. So the contracts that we've done, well, actually the agreements that the egg donor clinics have been writing is that the way that it works is that the recipient family comes and joins and adds their posting, and this can be done right after pregnancy. It can be done, you know, written into the agreement that it's done only, you know, after the birth of the child. But the recipient comes and joins, and then she pays for the lifetime membership or permanent membership for both her and the donor. And people put different things into their agreement. Sometimes posting medical updates once a year is put into the agreement. Sometimes it's twice a year. Sometimes it's when any medical issue comes up, you know, please share the information with me. And these contracts can be used. They're currently only have been used by egg donor families, but there's no reason why they can't be used by sperm donor families and embryo donor families as well. Next slide. So as I said before, you know, we realize that the clinics and the sperm banks are serving the needs of their customers, and that need is to get pregnant. And I know, I've been there. I know what it's like to be so singly focused on having a baby that you don't even want to think of anything else. You know, people say to me now, well, you know, given what you do, you know, when you got pregnant, didn't you think about the possible curiosities and needs of your child, you know, medical needs, curiosity, wanting to know who his donor was? And the truth is, I know it sounds ignorant, but no, I didn't even think about it. I was so singly focused on getting pregnant that I gave very little thought to the needs of my future child. And I think the role of fertility clinics is can be more of stepping in and adequately counseling people like me on letting them know it's not just about getting pregnant, but it's about looking at the needs and the desires of the child you're about to create. Next slide. So I think, you know, it's just the stress again that you as a clinic, a sperm bank, an agency, you do have a profound effect on parents' feelings about using donor conception and the children that will be born. And I think having them understand how important it is to be able to have updated medical information and to share medical information not only with the donor but with other families is critical. And we've seen it's critical, and it saved lives on the donor sibling registry. And that's, you know, in addition to disclosure, but it's not just about disclosure. You know, telling a child is very important, but that's not the end of the story. It's then also about honoring any curiosities that a child might have after that. And sometimes for parents that means putting aside their own fears and worries and hesitations about what that kind of connection, might do to the family, you know. So yes, we understand. We talk to people all the time who are terrified to reach out and make connections, and you know, and it's not always easy, but what we have found is that it can be extremely gratifying to not only the parents, but also the donors and the children. And next slide. So I guess, you know, the bottom line is we want to initiate more talking about this. We don't want to be looked at as the enemy of the clinics and the sperm banks. You know, we're helping the families that you guys have already helped. So instead of us sort of catching people out the back door who now have these kids who are curious or with medical issues, it would be really great if we could partner more upfront to better serve the needs of both the donors and the recipients, and ultimately the resulting children. So, you know, the bottom line is we all want to have happy and healthy families. So I think we have the same goal, but we could be better aligned. And that's why I'm here today. And I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Wendy. That was absolutely wonderful. Very interesting, as always. And I, again, put this question and answer slide up here so that you guys can, you attendees can see how to ask a question. If you have one, you can submit them now, and we will stay online with the webinar until we can answer all the questions that come in. If we don't have time to get to the questions before the top of the hour, we will send out a white paper that includes a transcript of all the question and answers, and everyone who is registered to attend will receive that. In the meantime, I wanted to tell you about some future events we are having next month in September. We are having a webinar entitled Embryo Quality and Cryopreservation. Our presenter is Dr. Jeffrey Nelson, and this webinar was originally scheduled for March, but it had to be rescheduled due to a conflict that arose. But he is going to present this webinar and looking at the term embryo quality, and I know this was a high-interest webinar, so we hope to see many of you there. In October, we are not having a webinar due to the ASRM conference, so we know that many of you will be attending that. But in November, the first week of November, due to the holiday month that's coming, and I can't believe I'm already talking about holidays, will be the Embryo Storage Solutions, a new alternative for donors. And that looks at a low-cost storage program for your patients with remaining embryos. And we will get to these questions now. Let's see. I see some questions coming in. So the first one, have you had much pushback from donors or a hesitancy to join the DSR from donors?
Well, when we first started this, we were told by people in the industry, you'll never have a donor come to the website. You know, donors are promised anonymity. None of them will want contact. And we believed that because we knew no better. What we've seen now is over the years, more and more donors are coming. Once they understand what the contact means and, more importantly, what it doesn't mean, you know, these kids are not looking for a mom or a dad. They just want to know where they come from. So the more that we kind of get out there and educate donors about what joining the DSR would mean for them, the more are coming to the site. More, you know, at first it was only sperm donors, then egg donors started coming, and now we're seeing embryo donors join as well. They're a little late to the party, but they're joining, and we think that's terrific.
So I have a question, Wendy. How does that work with embryo donors where the embryo is possibly created with a donor gamete? Do they – go ahead.
Yeah, no, a lot of the embryo, they post for sperm donor number whatever from this clinic, and then they make another posting, egg donor from this clinic, so they can connect with other people who have used that sperm donor, maybe who didn't create embryos, and other people that use the egg donor as well. So it's just two separate postings. Sometimes it's one posting too, because there could be families that, you know, shared embryos with each other. So it's done in a few different ways, but we like people to cover all their bases.
And you are there to help walk them through that. If they
Absolutely.
need to call and get assistance, and it's confusing and there's multiple donors.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is we tell them add as many postings as you need to post. If you want to put one, you know, if it was embryo from here, post that. And if we know the sperm donor came from here and the egg donor came from there, then put those on there too. We want to give people the best possibility for connecting with genetic relatives.
Okay. And so here's another question. Do you know of anyone through the DSR who has established any level of contact between donors and the offspring going beyond just emails or phone calls?
Absolutely. Many, many stories. And again, these vary. Sometimes people just meet the donors. They ask their questions. They stay in contact. There's no really familial feeling there or relationship. Some families come together and they create family with each other. They go on vacations together. They spend holidays together. You know, it's really each family defines this on their own, but we have hundreds of situations where DSR families and offspring have connected with donors and created some kind of relationship. But again, it's very varied.
Okay. And that is not the norm, you would say, to go on vacations together? I mean, does that scare some donors away when they hear that? Do you hear that from your donors?
No, because again, everybody, you know, we want the donors to know that they set the boundaries. If they're not comfortable going to Disneyland with 10 families, they certainly don't have to do that. Some do, you know, we know of several donors who want to connect with as many offspring as they can. They make themselves available, you know, and then other donors just say, you know what, I'm willing to share and update medical information. My family might not be comfortable with me creating a relationship with you, but this is the best I can offer for right now, and everything in between.
That's great. That's great to know that. Okay. Here's another question. Have you seen any difference in the willingness to join from sperm and egg donors versus that of embryo donors?
Yeah, like I said, I think sperm donors were kind of first to dip their feet in the waters on the DSR, soon followed by the egg donors, and embryo donors are just starting to come to the DSR. So, you know, and I think that's just technology too, and numbers. You know, there's more sperm donor children out there than egg donor children. You know, we have sperm donor children. We have sperm donor offspring on the DSR who were born all the way back in the 1940s. So they're, you know, they're approaching 70 years old. So there's many more, going back many more decades. So egg donation is newer, embryo donation is even newer than that. So it seems a normal progression as far as the speed with which they're coming to the DSR.
Very good. All right, and let's see, we have another question here. Is there any progress on a federal donor registry in the U.S. as there is in other countries?
No, and we've been working very hard on that, but we really come up against the ASRM. And we will continue to come up against the ASRM. They, as an entity, don't really want to see any limits on the number of children. You know, they've put out policy statements saying that there's no scientific evidence, you know, to limit the number of children per donor. They don't want to see regulation. Anytime regulation kind of pops up, maybe state by state, they quickly squelch it. So we're up against something very, very big, powerful, funded, and it makes it very, very hard. We have been talking to our congressman here in Colorado, who's very interested in putting together some kind of regulation, federal regulation, about more accountability in the donation business so that there's more accurate record keeping. Because first you have to have the accurate record keeping before you can start suggesting limits on the numbers of children. So that's really first and foremost is accurate record keeping. We should really know who and how many kids are born for any one given donor. And right now there is nobody knows and there's no way to know. So that would kind of be the first issue to tackle.
Okay, all right. And here is another question. If the donor embryos are leftover embryos from a family and they're not from donor sperm or eggs, is that also covered in the DSR?
Yeah, when you add a posting to the DSR, you're asked which kind of posting you want to add. Is it an egg donor, a sperm donor, or an embryo donor? So you would just choose embryo donor, and you can, you know, put a posting on just like the other two, but it would be categorized as an embryo.
Okay, very good. All right, another question here. If a clinic operates their donor program as an anonymous-only program, is there a way to still use the DSR to establish contact? I'm thinking that some recipients might be open to some level of contact in spite of the limitations of the clinic.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the majority of our parents from egg donor clinics are from clinics who only allow anonymous donations. But you know, I think what parents need to know is that even if your clinic was anonymous only, and even if you used a sperm donor who was anonymous, you still have every right to make yourself available for contact on the DSR. Many donors changed their minds. Many donors weren't given a choice, you know, and say, hey, I'd be happy to connect with the families. So I think, and some of these egg donor, the clinics that we've been working with only have anonymous donors, but they're still willing to put the DSR, you know, kind of give families the opportunity to connect in that way. So basically, as far as they're concerned, their donors are anonymous, but they're also pointing people in our direction. And really, that's all that clinics need to do is have our brochures or point them to our website and say, here's an option for you, and here's why this might be important. You know, here's things you might not be thinking about now, like your child's medical issues or your child's curiosity. And that's really the best that clinics can do up front is introduce these ideas, you know, no one introduced to me. I was clueless. So I understand parents who are singly focused on getting pregnant might not ever think about these things. But I think it's the clinic's responsibility to put it in front of them and say, here are some issues that could be extremely important to your child later on.
All right, thank you. One more, I guess there's a couple more here. Confidentiality laws and regulations vary from state to state. In the state of New York, a donor that donates anonymously cannot disclose their identity to their recipient or offspring. Can you comment on this point?
There's no law that states who you can and cannot have a relationship with. So we have many New York donors from IDENT, from other New York sperm banks, who are posted on our website. They're not breaking any law. They're not breaking any agreement. Families, donors have every right to make mutual consent contact with their genetic relatives, and there's no law, there's no agreement that can keep them from doing that. And we actually had one sperm bank on the website, this was about 6 years ago, who threatened a donor that way and said, you cannot do this. You cannot make yourself available for contact on the DSR. And they scared him so much he took his posting down. And we tried to explain to him there is nothing anybody can do to stop you from making mutual consent contact with your genetic relatives. You're putting yourself on the DSR to make yourself available to be found. You're not breaking any agreement or any law.
Okay, next question here is, what is the ARSM and why are they opposed to the DSR?
Yeah, it's the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, and it's basically, it's the fox watching the hen house. So it is the reproductive medicine industry that kind of quote unquote self-regulates themselves or claims to self-regulate themselves. So they have, they're not a regulatory body, but they make recommendations, and that's all they do. They recommend certain testing, certain genetic testing of donors. The FDA does mandate testing, STD testing, and a small amount of other tests, but that's it. ASRM has recommendations. But again, it doesn't matter. People can listen or not listen. But they are very powerful. They have lobbyists in Washington, and their goal is to keep regulation from happening within their industry. So it makes it very hard for us, for donor families, for the people whose lives are directly affected, to sort of change and have the industry move in a more ethical way when we're up against the industry itself, who does not want any change. They don't want to have less of a profit margin, and they're very slow to listen to the research that's been done, on the donor families. So it's an uphill battle for sure.
All right, and here's a logistics question, Wendy. Do donors have to pay a fee to join the DSR as well?
Yeah, right now we have anybody who joins the DSR pays the fee. Again, if people are in financial hardship, we work with them. We give away a lot of free memberships. We wouldn't ever keep anyone from contacting family members on the DSR because they couldn't afford it. We had about a year period in 2006 or 7 where we were sort of pressured. You have to give donors free memberships. And so we did that for a while. We offered free memberships for donors, but we didn't see an increase in their coming. And, it's kind of like, if donors want to make contact, I think it's a good thing for them to pay for their own membership too, because it shows that they do want to. I've had donors write me and say, I have no interest in this, but if you give me a free membership, maybe I'll send an email. And it's like, well, I don't know. Yeah, I think you might want it a little bit more than that if you're going to reach out to children who might really care to establish some kind of a friendship or connection with you. So yes, the short answer is yes. Everybody has to pay. We're a nonprofit. We received no outside funding. As a matter of fact, this week we're launching our new website that we've been building for 4 months, and it's a $40,000 job. So, things like that to keep us up and running, it's essential that we have membership income, as that's the only place that we have income.
And kind of along those lines, for your clinics, Wendy, I'm curious that already have used the egg donor contracts with the DSR. Have you heard from them regarding their recipients? Was there a pushback from them on having to pay for that as well? Have you heard anything about the recipient paying the fee for both the donor and the recipient?
No, actually, quite to the contrary. These people are paying thousands of dollars to get pregnant. So to hear that they can have permanent lifetime memberships on the DSR and have contact with their donors going forward for $175 for them and $175 for donors, I've not had any pushback whatsoever. I think it's a very small fee to pay for contact forever with your donor.
All right. Well, that answers my question. And at the moment, I don't see that there's any more questions here. I'll hang on for a few minutes, and I'll put Wendy's little information about her urging you to have discussions at your clinic up on the screen while we wait a second to see if any more questions come in.
Yeah, and if anyone wants any DSR brochures, if you go to our website, there's a link to the brochure right on the home page, so you can take a look at it. And we mail them out to clinics all the time. So we'd be happy to mail out a batch of brochures to anybody who sends me an email.
All right. So if we get any of those emails into us, we will pass them on to Wendy. I do not see any more questions coming in, so I am going to go ahead and end this. I want to thank everyone for coming to the webinar today. I hope you found it informative and helpful, and thank you so much. We will see you on November 7th.
Thanks, Coralie.
You're welcome.